Hello everyone, welcome back. It's Mark here again, and you're watching Last Week I Watched, where I watch movies and TV and review it and provide suggestions and feedback to you as to what you should watch. So, I hope you're all well, I hope you're all ready for some suggestions. Last week I watched 21 Bridges, Crime Scene: The Torso Killer, Operation Finale, The Witcher, Apostle, and The Guest. Okay, so let's talk about them. First up was 21 Bridges. It's a movie from 2019. It starred Chadwick Boseman, Sienna Miller, and J.K. Simmons. It was showing on Netflix. So this was about NYPD detective Andre Davis. He's known for always getting his man and for being very upright and the white hat hero. So when two criminals murder some cops, Andre goes to extreme lengths to capture them. But as he does so, he stumbles onto a massive conspiracy that links his fellow officers to a criminal empire. And then he must try to unravel who he's actually hunting and who's hunting him. During the manhunt, Manhattan is completely locked down, no exit or entry from the island, by closing all 21 bridges. So this is where the title comes from. Sadly, this was Chadwick Boseman's last theatrically released film before his death on August 28, 2020. It was a real loss to lose him, as he'd been doing some really good work and by all accounts was a genuinely nice guy too. Apparently on this film he donated part of his salary to Sienna Miller because the studio refused to meet her demands. He does a really good job in this film. He plays a driven detective really well. He's placed in a difficult situation when he has to bring corrupt cops to justice while trying to figure out who exactly he can trust. While the movie's story isn't that original, disgruntled cops engaging in drug trafficking to make extra money has been done before. It's well acted and it's well produced, and there is some good action in this thriller. The cast do a good job, and there is good tension and some good action sequences. It's also great to see Chadwick play an upstanding good guy one last time, and you know, it's a little bit sad knowing that this is one of the last films he did. Although he'll always be known as the King of Wakanda now, so check it out anyway. It's worth a watch. Next up was Crime Scene: The Torso Killer. It's from 2021. It starred Rebbe Paganini, Scott Watson, and Ralph Bracco. It's on Netflix. This was a true crime documentary. It's about 1970s New York City, and the torso killer is preying on women to fulfill his grotesque fantasies while eluding police. This series reenacts and discusses the investigation and hunt for the torso killer in New York. Reenactments are intercut with interviews with the people involved in the case. The series is interesting, as most of these sort of things are. They give you a bit of insight into, I guess, the sicknesses in some people's minds, but this was stretched out over too many episodes. For instance, it spends an entire episode discussing the porn industry in New York and another on sex workers in the area. So, you know, this adds colour and background to the period in which it's set, which is good. But it delves into it to such a degree that it isn't necessary, and I think they got a bit caught up on the sensationalism of it, so it distracts away too much from the investigation, and they probably could have condensed it down substantially. But, you know, I guess they got into the whole gawk at the, the porn and the sex workers and the things like that. Unfortunately, it seems like this case was part of what was responsible for revitalizing the area, which is a good thing, but I think that perhaps in the puritanical mind of the US, it was responsible for pushing the industry underground more, and so while it cleaned up a relatively well-known area of New York, I'm not sure that it really made the workers any safer. I certainly hope so. Anyway, but so, you know, it was quite interesting. It was interesting to see the period, to see how things had changed from the 70s. It was quite an eye-opener, you know, to see Times Square Obviously, I'm aware of it from all the neon and the shops and things like that. My wife's even visited there and walked around out there. But to see it back in the 70s, where it was wall-to-wall porn theaters and hookers and everything else, was quite an eye-opener, really. As usual, the person committing the crimes had some serious issues, and it's really interesting to see what the cops went through to catch him and the toll that it took on everyone involved. And just how much harder it must have been without modern forensics and technology that we now take for granted. Overall, it's an interesting true crime case, and if you're interested in these true procedural documentaries, check it out, but be prepared that it will take the long way getting to the point. Like I said, it could have been probably substantially cut down to maybe an episode or two, but it gets there in the end. Hang in there with it. Okay, next up was Operation Finale. This is a film from 2018. It stars Ben Kingsley, Oscar Isaac, Melanie Laurent, and it's on Netflix. So this is a historical thriller. It's based on the true story of a group of Israeli secret agents who tracked down and arrested notorious SS officer Adolf Eichmann after the end of the war. This was a man who masterminded the final solution. I don't think he was solely responsible for it, but he was certainly responsible for a lot of the logistics and making it happen. These agents located him accidentally in Argentina, and ironically then have to infiltrate and extract him from there to take him to Israel for an historic 8-month trial. If you're not aware of the historical events surrounding this movie is a good gateway to finding out about what happened. These kinds of movies are really important so we can learn about the past and hopefully avoid making the same mistakes in the future. The horrors of Nazism must never be repeated ever again. The cast in this film is really great, with Ben Kingsley portraying Adolf Eichmann. This is yet another World War II film that he's been in. Generally he plays famous Jewish figures, but in this case he's playing a Nazi, so that's interesting. But I think he mentioned in interviews that he was carrying the photo of a Jewish person that was killed during this period in his pocket to remind him of I guess the solemn obligation he had in communicating this forward. So he does a really great job as always. He's a very dependable actor. He really does well also in portraying the banality of the man. This is a man who was convinced that he was only doing his job, that he was only handling logistics, not making the decisions, and rationalized it to himself that way. Even though he cries innocence, he engages in a mind game with Oscar Isaac's character of Peter, and he's looking for ways to escape or sow doubt. The team of Israeli secret agents are increasingly desperate to secure a confession from Eichmann, while under time pressure to try to escape from Argentina before Nazi sympathizers locate them and retrieve Eichmann. I don't know how much the situation was enhanced for the film and for dramatic purposes, but the film is quite thrilling, similar to Argo, which is another recent film, I think, where they had to extract a bunch of diplomats and government workers and things from Iran when things went down over there, and they were all being rounded up and murdered and so forth. So it's a similar kind of thing. There's similar kinds of pressures. They don't pose as a theatre crew in this case, but they do try and smuggle them out of the airport as one of the flight crew, which I thought was quite clever. If you enjoy the film, use it as a springboard towards finding out about the actual events. The case itself was quite fascinating, and all the work that goes into tracking down and bringing these war criminals to justice is quite fascinating. The production is really good. It recreates the era very well. I'm sure it must have been very hard to abduct Eichmann. Well, today it would have been, but certainly back then it was interesting to see them apply old school spycraft, even going so far as often to just bluff their way through things. Very similar to, I guess, con men, the way they convince people by the sheer act of I'm right and I will convince you that I am right in telling the truth. So it is quite interesting. I highly recommend you check out the film. It's an important period in history, and there are definitely lessons that are necessary to be learned from it and never forgotten. And we must always oppose evil. That's more important now than ever. Okay, next up was The Witcher. It's started in 2019. It's starring Henry Cavill, Freya Allan and Anya Chalotra, and it's showing on Netflix. Currently there are 2 seasons available, and the series follows the story of Geralt of Rivia, a solitary monster hunter. He's some sort of combination human demon, something like that, and he hunts down monsters for bounties, all the while struggling to find his place in a world that fears him. Joining him on his adventures is Ciri, the child he was given to protect by the law of surprise, who may yet have an important destiny, and Yennefer, a powerful mage, excuse me, and the bard Jaskier, who sings songs of his adventures even if he really does not want him to. The series is based on the fantasy book series of the same name by Polish writer Andrzej Sapkowski. Apologies if I mangled it. There are 2 seasons currently, as I said. The first season is quite difficult to follow as it jumps around with different time periods and different characters in different locations, and it does take a bit of work to figure out how all these things fit together over the course of the season. Geralt jumps between monster hunting bounties, doing some work for the Kingdom of Sintra present day, and ultimately receiving his surprise. Yennefer jumps from somewhere in the distant past when she becomes a mage to present day with the war brewing and eventually happening, and crossing paths with Geralt, and it's intercut with these different time periods, so it might take a few episodes for you to sort of line it up and put it together. I guess in some ways you could say it's a little bit similar to Pulp Fiction in that different time periods, different things showing out of event sequence, and you kind of have to put it together. It will require you to pay attention. Thankfully, the second season is much easier to follow as the storytelling is much more linear. It's set in the present day showtime, and it basically just progresses the present day story along. This is both a good thing and a bad thing, I think, in some ways. It is much more straightforward, but perhaps fairly there has been some criticism, I guess, that it's a much simpler show for that. One thing I did miss from in season 2 that was much more noticeable in season 1 was particularly the side quests with Geralt. I like that the side stories often had morals and lessons to be learned, whereas season 2 is dealing much more with his relationship with Ciri and the ongoing looming war, and whatever the deal is ultimately with Ciri's prophecy. Henry Cavill does a fantastic job as Geralt, and he embodies the character very well. He also does a really great job with the sword fighting. I've read that apparently he's a big fan of The Witcher and a veritable encyclopedia of Witcher facts, so he really gives it his all in the show. Anya Chalotra also stands out as the mage Yennefer, and she goes on a real journey, particularly in season 1. Her initial scenes where she is deformed are particularly impressive, when she's acting with prosthetics as well as being all bent out of shape. I read that it was quite painful and actually caused some problems with her back, so she did some amazing work in very difficult circumstances. Thankfully, season 2 is a bit gentler on her. In fact, a lot of the cast in the show are really putting in a lot of effort, and you can tell there's a lot of love for the show. I hope it does well and we're able to finish wherever the story is ultimately going to. The sets and effects are also impressive. Everything just feels like there is a lot of effort going into the show. Clearly it's a labour of love. The Witcher is well worth checking out, so if you're into fantasy, please stick with it. You won't be disappointed, and check it out. Okay, next up is Apostle. It's a movie from 2018, starred Dan Stevens, Lucy Boynton, Michael Sheen. It was showing on Netflix. So this is a period piece. In 1905, Thomas Richardson travels to a remote island to rescue his sister after she's kidnapped by a mysterious religious cult demanding a ransom for her safe return. It soon becomes clear that the cult is built on secrets and lies, and these things threaten everyone on the island. This is a really great period thriller with some horror elements. Dan Stevens does a really great job again portraying a character who has lost his way but is trying to do one final act of redemption. He journeys to the island to rescue the sister and then becomes caught up with the cult that's on the island. Managing to evade capture at the docks, he slips into the community and attempts to blend in while looking for his sister. Michael Sheen portrays the cult leader, and while he seems to be decent, there are definitely signs there that something is going on and something may not be right. Everybody is dispensed with a jar and told to fill it with, I think, blood during the night and put it outside the door. So That seems a bit strange. Add in competition for leadership with other members in the cult and a supernatural element, and Thomas quickly finds himself sitting on a powder keg that is threatening to explode. When it finally comes time to rescue his sister and make their escape, things become very difficult and the power of the island intervenes. The movie is in some ways reminiscent of The Wicker Man. No, not the Nick Cage one with the screaming and the bees, but the original one from 1973, where a policeman finds himself out of his depth with a cult on an island, and bizarre rituals and things. The movie was really good. I found some of the comment on religion interesting, as people with power always seem to be corrupted by it, clinging to power and doing anything they can to keep it. They also tend to prey on the poor and perhaps the less educated, and manipulate them into doing whatever they want, usually to their benefit. The old absolute power corrupts absolutely thing. There are some quite disturbing scenes of punishment later in the film though, so be warned. They can be a little bit gory and a little bit shocking. I recommend checking out this film if you're into it. It's a very good thriller. They probably could have done some more things with the story, but I think overall they did a very good job, and I think it all worked out in the end and in where it needed to go. So well done. Check it out. The final film today is The Guest. It was from 2014, again starring Dan Stevens, Leland Orser, Micah Monroe, and Lance Reddick. It was on Netflix. So this one's about a soldier named David. He arrives at the Petersons' home claiming to be a friend of their son Caleb, who died in action, and the family welcomes him into their home. But when a series of unexplained deaths seem to be connected to his presence, daughter Anna starts poking into David's background. What she finds will have serious consequences for everyone. Dan Stevens does a great job in this film as David. Outwardly he appears friendly, perhaps overly so. The smile that he has permanently plastered on doesn't seem to quite reach the eyes. Something is definitely off with him. Almost like it's a mask that he's wearing. David quickly identifies the problems in the family, and ostensibly he's there to help. Luke is being bullied at school, and his boyfriend is dealing drugs, and Spencer has been passed over for promotion again. He bonds with the family by removing these problems. So when Anna starts to look into him because she's suspicious as to why her boyfriend suddenly gets dobbed into the police and framed up for murder, by that point he's part of the family and nobody believes her. So, but the trouble is her questions trigger a response from a special group that sends a group of soldiers after him. And at this point the action really ramps up, and David's mask drops as he then starts to clean everything up. The rest of the cast also do a great job, and it's nice to see Lance Reddick and Leland Orser, even if they're only in small roles. You don't get a lot of time with the characters, as more time is spent with the children and their circle of friends. I wouldn't have minded getting some more information about exactly what and why Reddick's outfit was messing around with David and the others. It's not elaborated on in too great detail. I guess it's just sort of left for you to make up your own backstory if you like. You know that they've been doing things to him. He's not right in the head, and they've accidentally let one of their weapons escape out of the locker, shall we say. Suffice to say, they've created the monster and they've lost control of it big time. The film is probably more a black comedy than a thriller. It can be quite tongue-in-cheek, even though it does get violent later on, quite suddenly in fact. But it doesn't really make any real attempt to hide that, something is wrong from the outset. So at some point it's just gonna go very wrong. It's probably tonally similar, I'd say, to Edgar Wright's Three Flavors Cornetto trilogy films. You've got a pretty good idea it's wrong, and then you're surprised when it goes violent. Sort of like Shaun of the Dead or his cop one as well, which name eludes me right now. I had a good time with the movie. It was entertaining. The third act was unexpected and exciting. Check it out. It's worth a watch. Okay, so those are my suggestions for this week. I hope they are of some interest to you. If, like me, you're trapped indoors largely because of COVID, it's good to have some suggestions for things to watch. So I'm going to stay safe indoors and watch some more things, and I'll see you for the next video. As always, please feel free to leave any comments below and let me know what you think, or if you just want to talk about one of these films, or heck, suggest another film, that would be great. Like and subscribe to the video so I can send you more. That would be really good as well. And there's a Twitter link down there as well where I tweet and let you know what I'm watching. And if you want to communicate with me in a more real-time fashion, that's a good place to do it. Okay, so thanks for watching. I'll see you next time. Stay safe and enjoy some movies. Bye now.